Hey, all, and welcome to Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing concepts through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard Gilliver from Skeptic Takeout, Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me, and Richard Gill from the Yorkshire Atheist. Today, we're going to be discussing Buddhism. So grab your English tea or your fresh brewed coffee with French vanilla creamer and join us as we unpack an Eastern religion that has really taken off in the West. This is episode 18, Buddhism. All right, Gilliver, do you want to start us off?
So I want to avoid this episode being a monologue because it could easily be. So let's kick off straight away with me not talking.
Oh, too late.
Find out exactly what your two thoughts on Buddhism are.
Well, one thought I have about Buddhism is how Laura says Buddhism, and it really sticks in my mind. But that's okay, Laura.
How do you say it?
I'd actually go between the two.
How do you say it?
Buddhism.
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 How do I say it? Buddhism. I think for the next hour we need to try and say it correctly.
The thing is, I do interchange between the two. So
Buddhism.
Buddhism.
You know, I'm gonna. You know what? American English. You know.
Buddhism is actually more phonetically correct to how it should be said. But
well.
We can't let the Americans beat us. So for this episode, we'll call it Buddhism.
Buddhism. So do you need the ooh in there? Buddhism, is that what it is?
I've lost track.
Yeah, it's not quite ooh. It's not quite the owly ooh, but it's
oh
more
Jesus!
Ooh than
you know,
ooh.
I quit. I'm out of here. Forget you guys. This is
so that was
pedantic.
our Buddhism episode.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed. And if anyone actually knows how to say the damn word, please hit me up.
Yeah, I mean, my knowledge about Buddhism is based on sort of, I guess, popular cultural Buddhism references, as opposed to much about the actual spirituality side of it. I don't really know much. Buddha as a figure is one that I've got in my consciousness, and I have an image of and this is probably wrong, but the cross-legged, tubby, bald guy who seems content with the world. And I know it involves lots of sort of meditation and enlightenment, although I'm not entirely sure what that means. I think that's
because you're not enlightened.
kind of it.
Yeah. So, okay. Before I even give my knowledge, I have a question for Gilliver already, based on something that Gil just said. He said that Buddha is generally depicted as like the fat, tubby, happy guy. And isn't that incorrect? Like, isn't that commonly referred to as
incorrect.
Buddha? But it's actually like Krishna or somebody else. Like,
no, that is incorrect. His name is.
I am right in thinking people
attribute it to Buddha.
Yes,
but he was athletic and thin, and maybe not athletic.
You get these little kind of fat Buddha statues at garden centers and things with the bald head and the big smiling face.
Yeah.
That was actually based on a true historical figure who was I say historical, is semi-historical Chinese monk who was called Budai. So I think that's where the confusion may come in. It was kind of the legend has it that it was kind of this big fat jolly monk who went around kind of like Father Christmas or Santa Claus, going around and giving presents to the kid. That's why if you often see statues of him, it's depicted with a sack. Is said to have lived around the 10th century. Yeah, so that's not actually Buddha. So Laura's getting the bonus point for getting that.
Dang, gold star in this episode.
Know that.
Yeah. I think I think that's the extent of my knowledge about Buddhism. No, no, in all honesty. So, oh, I'm gonna cut that out. I just had a burp from drinking all that coffee. I will cut that piece out. So, in all honesty, my knowledge is also very, very limited, and is largely also due to pop culture and what you kind of see around. But I also have a friend who is studying. She was kind of studying both like the yoga side of things, like the spiritual yoga, and she was delving into Buddhism a little bit. And I think that her explanations to me in the conversations we had, actually, as well intentioned as she was and as beautiful of a person as she is, I think it may have confused me more than actually like enlightened me or taught me anything.
Isn't yoga another religious practice?
It is. Yeah, it's separate from Buddhism. Yeah.
Yoga is a Hindu practice, but they both come from what proto-Hinduism was called Brahmism, and that's the religion that the Buddha was brought up in. The historical figure Gotama, Siddhartha, was actually, I nearly forgot his name then, how embarrassing.
You were struggling.
Siddhartha Gotama, who was a historical figure, was actually a Brahmin, as legend has it, but we'll go into that in a little while, was a Brahmin prince who actually grew up in that religion, and that was proto-Hinduism. And there you kind of had a lot of religions, well, a couple of religions that are still around now, like Buddhism and Hinduism, and Jainism came out of that, which is another ascetic Eastern religion from the same area. And yeah, so you are going to get crossovers in those practices.
Yeah, and especially I think in our culture, and so I think she understood the difference between the two. I think that they were just both things that fascinated her and that she was studying. Yoga, she was specifically studying for her own practice. So, but and the only reason I brought it up and included both is because it was her passion and not mine. What I did learn from it, it really just confused me even more. I think the most solid knowledge that I got about Buddhism was just during my college studies and like world religions classes, and I studied in one of my classes, I did a study on a Buddhist. They called it a church still. It was in California. And I met them and got to hang out with them and ask some questions and like did like an anthropological study on them. Very small time. But that too left me with more questions than answers, because I realized during that study that I had always seen Buddhism as like having maybe one or two sort of split offs, but not really being so fractured. And I learned that there actually are quite a lot of different Buddhist sects, just like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and every other flipping world religion. There is no one exact overarching, like it has to be this. And so that was interesting.
Pesky humans, isn't it? Pesky humans spoiling the
I know the word is delivered and it's delivered and it's delivered, and we just keep going and corrupting it, right?
So what was I going to ask? Regarding, you've both mentioned pop culture.
Yeah.
So what kind of do you take away from that regarding it?
Because I think I'm going to move away from your question and come back to it slightly, because I think I have always felt that Buddhism, obviously coming from a Christian background, living in Britain, Buddhism feels very separate from my cultural understanding of religious ideas and cultural ideas, I guess. It feels very foreign and distant, and it's something that is obviously people do follow Buddhist practices and Buddhist teachings and are Buddhists in the UK and in the West and stuff, but it does feel very separate. And so I think that's why I guess lots of the ideas that I have are through pop culture, in terms of meditation, sitting with fingers like this for some reason, being at one with the universe, and all these sorts of little phrases and ideas.
The cliche stuff.
Yeah, the cliches, because it feels so separate and so different and so foreign. It feels like, I guess, a much bigger deal to try and grasp and sort of get to grips with in a way. I don't know if that sounds reasonable, but
so then I have a question for you. Like, do you think that, because this is how I feel, or how I felt when I was younger, especially, is like, do you feel like religions like Buddhism and maybe like Taoism and Jainism and some of those other isms out there, that they're sort of more mystical, whereas from our cultural perspective, Christianity seems less mystical. I mean, when you look at it an overarching, looking at all religions from the outside, they all look equally flawed and equally mystical and all that stuff. But there's something about being raised in a Christian culture where Christianity and Judaism don't seem that mystical, but Buddhism.
Distinction between monotheism and another sort of religious ideas and sort of systems, you know, Islam makes sense to me still, Judaism makes sense to me, and all those, you know, I know they're very similar, like related religions to Christianity, but they make sense because I guess they follow the same model, don't they? Of there's a God, there's rules, there's a holy text, and it's kind of all that. Whereas there's the whole thing of like, you know, I can't remember, Gilliver, if I used the word reincarnation incorrectly to refer to Buddhism, and you corrected me, but you know,
yeah, it's generally referred to as rebirth.
Rebirth, brilliant. So like, but there's all those sorts of ideas which are just nowhere in the religious ideas that I've been brought up with and that I understand. And so there is that, yeah. It's like, I don't even know if Buddhism is a theistic religion, if there is an idea of God or gods, or whether it is just ideas about the universe and the world and things. I can't remember what your question was. Did I answer your question?
Oh, Laura. I totally thought it was Gilliver's question.
Yeah.
I'll cut that. I'll cut that. You're right. No, you're right, because I'm literally like losing it. So
Laura is still ill, by the way.
This is
because we did an analysis. This is week 2, but
week 2 of Laura's cold. Yeah, but it's actually 5 minutes later from the last episode. I'm still suffering.
So you got 5 minutes worse since
I got and more tired. Yeah, and apparently, like, I'm forgetting what it is I said before you talked. But
oh, brilliant. Well, I forgot.
No, but you're talking about it was the mysticism, right? Like how it feels more. And yeah, I think you did answer my question. I think that that's probably true when any one culture looks at an outside culture's beliefs. Like their beliefs seem so normalized and seem so reasonable, and it doesn't seem all that woo-woo-y. And then you look at somebody else's beliefs and you're like, man, that's crazy, or that's odd. And I definitely felt that way about it pretty much any Eastern religion, because the traditions are different, the colors, the songs, even like the instruments used to make the music, right? Everything seems so different,
exotic,
yeah. And so looking at it,
I mean that because that can be used in a demeaning way, like
no,
it's this
not at all,
thing is whatever, and it's just, but like I think it can seem like that.
And I think part of that exoticism is what attracts a lot of people to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because there is that sort of reaching for something different. Yeah,
we get the go on, Richard.
I was just going to say, we haven't actually mentioned it in this episode, although we're kind of assuming that people know, but you have lots of history with Buddhism specifically, don't you, Gilliver?
I've been practicing meditation for 20 years, thereabouts, and I've been studying the Buddhist scriptures for not academically, professionally, but as a point of interest for at least 10 years. So I've got a lot of background in kind of, you know, I try and look at it from the scholarly perspective rather than the thing, and it does take me on to one of the points I was going to mention about what you said earlier about gods in Buddhism, that it's not, when I'm talking in this episode, I want to make clear that I am looking at it from the scholarly perspective. I'm not talking about it as a practitioner. So I don't, because there are so many, it's so wide ranging. There are people who call themselves Buddhists who are literally pretty much completely devoid of what kind of traditional Buddhism that is the scholarly pursuit of it is. So I don't want to sound like I'm disparaging those people in any way, because I don't want to commit the not a true Scotsman fallacy. I perfectly accept that those people are legitimate Buddhists as well. I just want to get out of that away, because
but then it can mean very different things.
Yeah, because I don't want it to sound, I'm going to be talking, like I say, about a lot about the scriptural evidence and stuff, and it's completely devoid from what like modern Western schools practice and things. So I don't want to kind of muddy the waters and make people think that I'm disparaging them, because that is not my intention in any way, shape, or form.
So you bring up
Go on, Laura.
I was saying you bring up a really good point, because even the little bit that I know about Buddhism, you have the people, and we're talking about practitioners, the people who, as practitioners, will say that it's a religion, but it just doesn't have a God, or it does have a God. And then you'll have the practitioners that say it's not a religion, it's a philosophy, right? It's just a way of living your life. So that is a really good distinction to make early on, is that Buddhism means different things to different people on the inside. So to speak on it on the outside is, from my perspective, being so uneducated, is a little bit difficult.
Yeah,
in the way that
Richard.
Like we were talking about Christianity and stuff, in a way that Christianity doesn't have that sort of fundamental split. You know, like everyone who is in different sects and denominations and whatever flavor of Christianity you've got, it's still a religion with a God and all of that lot. Whereas actually those distinctions you're making between whether it is a religion or a philosophy is actually quite fundamental in terms of how you approach not only what there is in terms of, you know, texts and scriptures and practices and stuff and all of that.
There is in Buddhism what I mean, if you have a look at it, we'll use Christianity as an example, because you've got kind of your Nicene Creed Christians, which is your main body of Christianity, like legitimate, agreed upon Christianity. And then you've got these little offshoots like the Christadelphians or Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, who all believe slightly different things and don't quite fall into that Nicene Creed kind of area. You've got the same thing with Buddhism. You've got the kind of, there's two major schools of Buddhism. There's the Theravada and the Mahayana. And they both believe the core things of what they believe are the same. And all the little offshoots that come off them generally tend to believe those same things. But you do get these little outside, like I said, some of the Western schools that have sprung up in the last 100 years or so tend to kind of dismiss a lot of that stuff. So it is analogous in a way.
I was just going to say, would you give us a quick rundown of some of those things that they believe? Like, what are the main tenets and what are the main sort of bullet points?
Well, I mean, I can do. This might get a bit complicated.
In 2 minutes or less, sum up all of Buddhism.
Right. Pretty much what all Buddhists believe, to an extent, more certainly all the major schools of Buddhism believe in what's called the Four Noble Truths. There's a lot of stuff in Buddhism which is numbered, by the way. You've got the Four Noble Truths, which is there is suffering in the world. That is dukkha. It's called dukkha. It's really hard to give it a direct translation. It's usually direct explained as suffering. But that's not quite right, but that's usually how it's translated. Then you've got the second noble truth is a rising or origin of this dukkha. So that's called samyudaya, and that comes. That's basically things coming into existence, and when they come into existence, they have suffering. Then you've got the end of suffering.
Really cheerful.
Then, well, a lot of people do think it's nihilistic, but it's not.
But it's not. It's opposite.
Yeah, it's. Then you've got the cessation of suffering. That's the third noble truth, which is called Nirodha. And then you've got Marga, which is the noble eightfold path. I told you there were a lot of numbers involved. Yeah. And the noble eightfold path is basically the way you should live your life to try and get rid of this suffering. And that's right understanding, right thought, right speech, right conduct, right means of making a living or right livelihood, and right mental attitude, or right effort, and right mindfulness, and the last one is right concentration. And that's
I think Gilliver gets the gold star for today.
Agree.
But there's everything's numbered. Literally everything in Buddhism is numbered. They're the Four Noble Truths, including the Noble Eightfold Path, are what pretty much all Buddhists believe in one form or another. Then you've got what's called the 3 marks of existence, which is exceptionally important, but not all Buddhists kind of jump onto this little part of it, which is dukkha, which we've already come across, which is suffering, anicca, which is impermanence, and anatta, which is non-self. And that's where the difference between rebirth and reincarnation comes in. Because generally speaking, reincarnation deals with what's called Atman, which is what Hindus believe in, which is a soul. And in Buddhism, there is no soul as such to speak of. It's what is reincarnated is like your clinging desires. And that's what is actually reincarnated. So you don't have a self as such. And that's what anatta means. It means not self. It is the negation of Atman. So it's an Atman or anatta.
So one thing that I found really interesting about all of that, aside from the fact that it's very, very confusing in terms of its actual application, that's why people have to study it, right, and learn more about it.
Yeah.
But it sounds on the surface very much more, I don't want to use the word scientific, but I mean, you have all these religions that have like, and then the God came down and then they blessed the person and then they caused this to happen and caused that to happen. And then you have like the Buddhist.
Like lots of religions full of myth, isn't it? And that doesn't sound mythical.
Well,
yeah, it still sounds wrong, but it sounds a little bit more grounded in like observation and reality, and a little bit less grounded in sort of like this thoughtful like thought experiment, you know?
Yeah, and this is why a lot of people try and like get rid of all the supernatural elements out of it, because they think that it is pretty much a system in its core kind of thing. It's a system. It's an
ideology kind of.
If you think illness is the suffering is the illness, it's basically a medicine, a system of medicine to get rid of that illness. That's how it's kind of thought about. But regarding the supernatural stuff, which is one of the points that Richard brought up originally, which I wanted to touch upon, Buddhists do in general, certainly scripturally, you can't really have scriptural Buddhism without this. You've got reincarnation, you've got different realms of existence. Now, there are different numbers of realms depending on kind of which system you're looking at, but you're talking about like 32 realms of existence that you can be reborn into, and you can come back as ghosts, what's called hungry ghosts. You can come back as gods or heavenly beings. And so there are in the I can't remember which sutra it was, but God actually talked to Brahma, Buddha talked to Brahma, who was the like proto-Hindu god, and he actually he had a conversation with him. He was like physically having a conversation with him. And so these things are accepted in Buddhism as real things. They're not just kind of metaphorical as some people would have you believe. They're
so that brings up
go on.
No, I'm sorry, that just brings up a really good point, that like when you're looking at something at the surface level or from the outside, it can seem really a lot more reasonable or grounded. And I know we're talking about Buddhism, but I'll even throw something like Scientology out there, right? Where from the outside, when you just hear a few little clips and phrases like, oh, it's about self-improvement, it's about self-realization or actualization or whatever, it sounds very, very reasonable. But then where I think it all falls apart for me, and where I was starting to get attracted to Buddhism and then where I drew back, is where I did learn that they do have all these myths and sort of stories and a lot of sort of like supernaturalism worked into the belief system.
Because the idea of like, here's a list of 8 ways to live your best life and to, work on yourself, self-improvement and all of that lot. Yeah, it does sound practical and reasonable. And how can that be a bad thing?
It's a very ruly religion. There are lots of rules in it. For monks and nuns, there are more rules for nuns than there are monks. But you're talking 200, like nearly 300 rules for monks.
Jeez.
And there's a whole section of what's called the Tipitaka, which is or Tripitaka in Sanskrit, which is the Buddhist canon. And the whole first part of that, Tripitaka means 3 baskets. So it's set out into 3 different kind of sets of teaching. The first part, the Vinaya Pitaka, is all about the rules for the monks and nuns and how they came about. And there is some real, there's some really like crazy stuff in there. I'm not even going to go into it. Some of it's disgusting. The translation I've got of it, some of it's been left untranslated because the translator actually says in the footnotes it is not suitable for a Western audience. And
wow.
If you consider some of the stuff,
what a teaser trailer for me Googling something after the episode. Wow, that's going to be the first
Well,
thing I
so
do.
yeah,
I don't
fascinating.
Want to. There is like stuff in there which is translated by the same author, which is vile. It's literally disgusting. It turns your stomach, and it just leaves to the imagination what the stuff that isn't translated actually is.
That brings up a good point, is that like we talk about the surface level stuff, but the depth that founders of religion or perpetuators of religion go to dictate like the smallest little details of what you should do, what you should eat, what you should say. That is something that I didn't even know about Buddhism just now. And I granted my studies are very, very limited, and there's a lot that I already knew that I didn't know. But that kind of point out that
from a historical point of view, that the Vinaya came along quite a bit later on. It wasn't the Buddha who, although it's attributed to him in the stories, it wasn't. The text isn't believed to be till a little bit later. In Buddhism, you've got what are called early Buddhist texts, which the name gives it away. And they're the ones that are kind of attributed to the Buddha and his direct followers. And then the rest of the canon is kind of believed to have come afterwards. And the Vinaya is one of those. It's believed to have come a little bit later. So the timeline of Buddhism is very interesting anyway. Interrupt at any time because I will talk all night.
Because this is fascinating me. So to me, what fascinates me about what you're saying right now is that there was a historical context, and it may or may not be known, when a person following Buddhism wrote down specific things that later got canonized or added to the religion. And it makes me wonder, like, if I had a time machine to be able to go back, and this is true of like the Bible and the Quran as well, like to be able to go back and be like, what actually happened at that time, and what was the actual context in which this person wrote, like in the Bible, for example, don't boil a baby cow in its mother's milk. What exactly led to that verse? Like, why was that verse significant?
Honestly, as a I wanted to do that so often, and I just wasn't able to. I think that's true though, isn't it? And again, talking about Christianity, because it's a common reference point we'll make, but like, there are sects of Christianity which say, where, we are closer to what the early Christians would have done, or these traditions are closer to what they would have done. And it's like, how much of what we've got that is Buddhism nowadays in that bracket, what of that was just cultural things that people added on, what of that was interpretations that people have taken, or things wanted to chuck on there themselves.
I think if you have a look at the oldest form of Buddhism, which wasn't one of the original forms, but it's the oldest one we have left, is the Theravada school. Like I said, there were 2 main schools. If you have a look in some textbooks on Buddhism, some older textbooks, it'll tell you there are 3 schools. It'll also tell you that there's Hinaya Buddhism, but that's not used anymore because that's a derogatory term for the Theravada.
Oh, interesting.
So if you do come across that term, it's and they tell you there are 3 schools, it's kind of derogatory, so it's not tend to be used anymore. But you've got the Theravada, which is the oldest school of Buddhism which is left, and then you've got the Mahayana. Mahayana is probably the most famous school of Buddhism because it's within Mahayana the Zen school comes from and the Tibetan school comes from. So they're the most famous, and in the West anyway, they're the more famous and the ones we tend to be most familiar with, rather than the Theravada.
That's really fascinating. I think what that tells me is that this whole concept of religion or ideology or philosophy is like just the conceptualization of one and the creation of one is a very, very human, very natural thing that happens across cultures. But it seems to me like the complexity of it growing and adding complexity to it over the years is also just a universal sort of human,
Oh yeah,
like a trait. Like it's something that you find in all religions, where you might think it's simple on the
Inevitable.
outside, and the more and more you get into it, and the more you delve into it and research it and look into the history of it, the more complex it gets, and the more like what you said, rules there are, and books there are, and different
yeah.
scriptures that are accepted or rejected.
And when you go back to the to the Theravada, which is the oldest one we have now, as I said earlier, a lot of those, some of those teachings are considered to be authentic by scholars to the Buddha and his immediate followers. But so you can kind of build a layer up, but the Mahayana stuff, some of that's because they both have Tripitakas, but they have different ones. And the Mahayana Sutras around the time of Jesus that's when they first started coming into being, and they were said to have been held in heaven because people weren't ready for them. That was the kind of the later excuses that were given as to why they weren't as old, why they weren't as old,
why they were
didn't go back
later
in time. Yeah. And so it's interesting that, but yeah, like I said, they do share a lot of crossover anyway. And a lot of the Mahayana people do still use the Theravada scriptures as well as the Mahayana ones.
So
I was just going to say, I know we're coming up to where we have our commercial break. And I was just wanting to sort of then pick up the conversation in terms of sort of the meditation and those sorts of practices to do with Buddhism, if that's okay with you, Gilliver.
Yeah, that's fine.
Areas of expertise. So if we'll pause now, and I hope you pay close attention, lovely viewers and listeners, to the commercial advertisements that we have in store for you.
Awesome. We will be right back.
So what have we got coming up? Not much.
Absolutely.
I think we've all got pretty empty calendars. I think this is the first time that none of us have had anything to do at all. It's just so we're just.
What'll happen is by the time we actually air this episode, we will have our calendars full all over again. At the moment of recording, we got nothing going on.
And Richard Gill will be on 100 shows in a week.
Oh, I will be chock-a-block. One good thing though, if we're not directing people to see sort of us on other shows and things, is it's a real good opportunity if you've not caught some of our past episodes, because we've got quite a few now. To go back and see some of the stuff that we've talked about before, because we keep sort of casually referencing things we've talked about in this episode and that episode, and actually we've said quite a lot over the past, over a dozen episodes now. So it's good. Go look at that stuff.
Go and look at that stuff. And what other place can they find out about us, Richard?
Well, it's funny you should ask. Our Facebook discussion group is a wonderfully attractive place to share opinions, ask questions, and generally just talk to people who are like-minded and usually nice. I say usually nice. Have I met any?
I've always been nice.
Yeah. I made it sound as if there were some unnice people, but actually, yeah, they've all been nice people.
So if you want to be the token asshole in our group, feel free to go ahead and unsubscribe from our page and see yourself out before you post anything. But no, so far our group has been really phenomenal and fun, and the conversations have been really intriguing.
Yeah, certainly. And you can find the link to that in the description on our linktree/Skeptic Hangout link. And all our other platforms are on there as well. So do check that out. And as well, pass it along to people who you think might be interested I know I have some sort of close-ish family sort of friends who I didn't know at all would be interested in this sort of show, but actually are really engaged with it, for example. And so you never know who's interested in stuff like this that we're talking about. So. Okay, so welcome back. Thank you for subscribing to us on all those feeds and all of that lot that we talked about just then, and joining our Facebook group. But now that you're back listening, I introduced the sort of topic about talking about meditation and those sorts of practices. I know, Gilliver, you've had a lot of experience in that sort of area, so I'm just really interested in sort of how, for you as someone who doesn't necessarily buy into all the like spiritual side and the mythological side and all that sort of bit of Buddhism, how that sort of works for you and what that's all about.
It works for me very well. I am very often described by my friends as the happiest person they know, and
they must not know very many people. No,
I tend to concur because I don't
Nice.
tend to get like I'm not always like, people have this vision of kind of Buddhist people being sat and calm and still and never getting irate or anything. That's not all true. Buddhist meditation is not about it's the ultimate goal is to get, of course, to Nibbana or to attain Nibbana. They're very bad ways of putting that, but Nibbana is the ultimate goal of Buddhism. So when people say Buddhists believe in reincarnation, what they're talking about is they're not saying that they believe in reincarnation forever and ever and ever and ever, because the actual goal is not to be reborn anymore. Which is and it's meditation which facilitates that in the kind of from the scriptural perspective. From a practical perspective, meditation is just really good for calming you down.
Yeah,
it's really good for making you see things in an equanimous way, where you don't judge things anywhere near as much. You can be a lot more patient. You can have a lot more stillness and calmness and things like that in your life. You can be more, it gives you more concentration. And these are all like medically tested things, scientifically tested things. I don't want to get into the Buddhism is very good with science, because there's a lot and there are books written trying to say that Buddhism is very good with science, but there's a lot of bullshit in Buddhism. You know, in Buddhism, you can tell one of the ways you can tell somebody is a good person is because they have a larger heart. So there's a lot of bullshit. You know what I mean? It's not I'm not trying to equate all of Buddhism with medical science, but there has been a lot of stuff done with mindfulness, which has become really popular in the West, and it really does. Go on.
Meditation, because I could just sit and do like meditation. Is there something specific about Buddhist meditation as opposed to generic meditation, or do we actually get our ideas about meditation from Buddhism?
That's a good question, and I think it's a bit of both.
Right.
I think I've interviewed Jenna Belk on my channel before, who we've had on our show, who's a friend of all of ours, and she's got her own little meditation show, and she says she knows nothing about meditation, and she's completely secular with it. Doesn't come, but a lot of the kind of mindfulness ideas which she is practicing do stem from kind of Buddhist meditation. There are forms of meditation which have nothing to do with Buddhism, and there are different methods of meditation within Buddhism and outside of Buddhism. And it's one of those things that can get all very complicated. I've had people say to me before that, oh, I've meditated and I've literally they're speaking about, and I'm not talking about Buddhist people, I mean spiritual people who've talked to me about meditation, said, oh, I've become one with the universe. And they mean literally they have become one with the universe. And that's bullshit. That is not what meditation does.
Right. From my understanding, it's more about mindfulness. It's about recognizing your thoughts and being aware of your thoughts as they're coming in and
that's
out.
part
Right?
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. But it's there's actually a warning in Buddhist meditation that when you get quite advanced, you do enter this state of bliss, which makes you feel, and it is an erroneous feeling, it's not correct. It makes you feel like you are at one with everything, like you are literally part of everything else.
And haven't they tested that? Like, haven't they taken people who are really, really good at meditating and watched their brain waves while they're meditating, and they can see how they're putting themselves into completely separate mental states? Like, and I'm not talking about anything spiritual about it. I'm just saying they can change the way that their brain is activating when they're meditating.
But that's a slightly different thing to what I'm talking about. The kind of, I mean, we'll come on to that in a minute, but the people I'm talking about who are saying that they've become talking about, it's kind of like these people who think there's these people who talk about the experiments with DMT and that from John Hopkins, who say that all the world's religions are one, and you literally physically become one with the universe, and everything's literally connected. And there's a warning against that idea in Buddhism, because that's seen as a bad thing. Getting that kind of that's seen as an other form of attachment, and attachment is really bad in Buddhism. It's that makes you be reborn. So it's this attachment to this really blissful state that you can get into is warned against. It's like seen as an obstruction to attaining nirvana.
Because it's about an emotional attachment, like it's making you want to stay here, right? Yeah. Whereas nirvana is about getting, or however you said it differently. But
what you were saying about there have been tests, and there's been a lot of tests about meditation in Buddhism and the mind states and that and things, and it genuinely does make you happier. There was a thing a few years ago with a Tibetan, I think he was a Tibetan monk, but it was a Frenchman called Mathieu Ricard, who was labeled, he made lots of tabloid headlines, the happiest man in the world, because they'd literally tested his the kind of way his brain had changed.
And measure the happiness levels in the blood,
right?
Yeah. But in other tests they've done, which aren't quite reached so much higher headline news, are about how people who are in mindfulness, like monks who have attained a high level of mindfulness meditation, well, not necessarily just monks, but that was the test focused on, I think. If they experience something like pain, then when that experience is first felt, they actually have a heightened experience of it. So if someone who's really good at meditation feels something hit them, it feels pain, they actually feel it more intensely than someone who's not.
Interesting. I would have thought it was the opposite.
Yeah,
it actually drops away quicker, and they're actually more equanimous towards it. Although they feel it more intensely, they don't suffer as much from it. And that's a key point in Buddhism. That is a key, because as we found out when we were talking about the noble truths earlier, suffering is what the first noble truth, dukkha. And it's that kind of drives everything in our life. It's that attachment and that clinging to suffering. So it's really interesting how these tests were done. And it was a surprise. I think it was a surprise to the experimenters as well. That this, because like and me when I first read the kind of studies, because I expected, as you said, Laura, that wouldn't be the case,
right?
And being someone who's kind of like meditates quite intensely myself, as I mean, I've never experienced pain while I've been in meditation, so I can't actually speak to that. But being someone who meditates myself, that really surprised me as well, that was the case.
Yeah. So, I think, like, to take this conversation, like a little bit beyond just the meditating, what in Buddhism do you think that is so attractive? Okay, so yes, meditation seems to be a big part of Buddhism, and it seems to be sort of like a catchphrase, or like everyone's curious about it. But I don't see like this huge movement toward, I mean, I guess I do see a lot more people talking about meditation,
Yeah.
but there's this whole other aspect of Buddhism that we haven't really touched on, and that is the philosophical, like the way of life, like the Eightfold Path. And now you're talking about not just internal regulation, which I mean that oversimplifies meditation, but now you're also talking about outward expressions, right? So for me, what I find attractive about Buddhism, besides just the meditation, and I do want to touch on that in a second because I think it's fantastic, but is the Eightfold Path and the whole idea of your actions, measuring them in terms of rightness and wrongness, right? Like right thought, right action. I think that is a very attractive sort of teaching, like removing it from all the gobbledygook and all the spiritual stuff and the historical and all the stuff like that, but just extracting the idea of deliberately doing certain things in your life in a certain way, that is meant to um, like it's meant to improve yourself and your way of life, but it's also meant to improve the experience that others have of you, right? Like does that
And
make sense?
obviously,
Like it's very
just
attractive.
the rationale for it is in order to break that cycle and all of that stuff, isn't it? Within Buddhism, I
Yeah.
said Buddhism then instead of Buddhism. Interesting. It's covered off on that. But yeah, like on it's like that philosophy without all the woo that goes with it, isn't it?
Right.
And actually, is that in and of itself a good thing? I think often, obviously, us three are atheists and we don't have religious belief systems, but often people do talk, don't they, about how as atheists you suddenly do lose that structure of life that religious ideas or religious belief systems sort of come with. And
Yeah.
there is something comforting in having a path to follow, isn't there?
It's like we need pithy instructions. We need like here's
Mm.
like the 10 commandments and here's the nine, oh I can't remember what they're called in Islam. The things that you need to do, and here's the Eightfold Path, right? Like you have this numbered list of pithy instructions that make it just really simple. And then as an atheist or someone who doesn't follow a specific ideology or religion, you have every option available to you, and you literally have to pick and choose which one fits or doesn't fit or is good or not good. And so what's attractive about these lists, right, is that it just makes your decision making and like your lifestyle choices simple. Like you don't have to think about
I
it.
guess you could, as a Westerner, pick that up, that aspect of Buddhism up, couldn't you? Just without having to be invested in that mythological, spiritual side of.
Oh, that is done. Yeah, that's done quite a lot especially in the West. Yeah,
Yeah.
but going back to I want to come back onto what you were talking about the kind of right way of doing things in just a second. But I do want to just touch on the fact that in Buddhism, I think a lot of things are numbered just through practical purposes.
Yeah.
Because it was for like hundreds of years. It was transmitted via
Oral, right?
just reciting.
Yeah.
Recitation, and that's why in what you hear in Buddhist temples, no matter what language it's in, is when you hear, whether it's Japanese or the Pali language, which is still used in Theravada and things, but it's actually a dead language apart from in Buddhism, or the Mahayana, which is Sanskrit, or Tibetan. All the chanting you hear it's actually the scriptures being recited.
Right.
It's not a form, it's not like singing praises or anything like that. It's actually the recitation of the scriptures, and that's originally how they were transmitted. They were given to groups of specialized monks who actually did that to remember them. There's small parts given to one part and another small part, and that's how they were passed on.
Well, that brings up a good point of memorability, right? Like, and I know we have things written and we have the internet now where everything's right at our fingertips. But one thing that makes an ideology, and one of many things that makes an ideology more successful is that memorability, right? The ability to recall what it is. And I think in terms of the surface level stuff, that Buddhism teaches. I think that's really high. It's really easy.
Mhm.
Like even if you don't remember exactly what the 8 are, you really remember like the concept. Like you can think of like, am I thinking good thoughts? Am I saying good things? Am I doing good actions? Right? Are my ways of making money honorable and honest? Right?
Yeah.
And you don't have to
Yeah.
remember what each of the exact words of the Eightfold Path are. And I think that that's true. Like looking back on it, and I don't know a lot of stuff about a lot of religions. I only know a little bit about a few, but in every single one of them, you have the same thing. You have like a short list of here are the things to remember. And I think that's part of what makes it so appealing and so successful.
There's like sound bites of it, isn't
Yeah.
it? You know, your pocket guide to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny as well because it gets really complicated in Buddhism, because especially if you're reading an older text, because the older texts tend to be translated in such a way that they use kind of westernized language.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So they might say, avoid doing evil and do good instead. But that's actually quite a bad translation when you're talking about kind of Buddhist ethics.
Oh, wow.
Because what those things are referring to is not what's good or bad in a like a black and white way as it is in Christianity or in Islam.
I'm going to say is that sort of jumping on that Christian, Western, Judeo-Christian idea.
Well, it was just so the way they were translating it at the time, that was what they understood it to mean.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually, in that kind of Buddhist ethics system, is more about what's beneficial to attaining nirvana and what's not beneficial to it. So rather than it being a good or bad, it's more of a avoid doing this because it'll hold you back, and concentrate on doing this because it'll push you forward. There's no judgment in it. If you do a bad thing, it's not a bad thing. You are going to be punished for it. I mean, you will because of the law of karma, so you would in a way, but that's a completely separate thing.
Yeah. That reminds me of just regular like health and fitness, right? Like we talk about good food and bad food, right? And it's like, really, it's just, this is going to help you towards your dietary goals, and this is not going to help you towards your dietary goal. And same thing with exercise. This will help you get stronger, doing this won't, right? And so
this will help you get stronger, but this other thing will help you more.
Or there's various levels. Yeah, that's a good point, right? Or this might help this one person but not help you, and then this other thing is what helps you. Like people have different metabolisms or different abilities or different like body types and stuff. So that's kind of what that reminds me of, is it's not a matter of thou shalts, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Gilliver, but it sounds more like a list of like this might be good for you. So when they say right speech, for example, I'm guessing that right speech doesn't mean that there's one kind of speech that's laid out for all Buddhists and this is the right kind of speech. It's more like what works in different situations or for different people.
And think about where you're going and what you're aiming.
Not necessarily, and that's where it gets a bit confusing. You were bang on the nail, by the way, when you said about, I can't remember what you said. You used very Christian language, and it was really good. The thou shalts and thou shall nots. Right. It's not like that. Buddhist ethics is not like that at all. But regarding the kind of the Eightfold Path and a lot of the rules and instructions, they are very strictly formulated.
So they're more specific.
Like if you talk about taking alcohol, for example, that's just one rule of. Oh God, we could go into so many rabbit holes on this. That's just one rule, and that's something that both lay people and monastics have to follow.
Okay.
And
so let me stop you there. You say have to. So this is where I'm getting a little bit twisted up, because you say like, when you say have to, is it because if you like, let's say it's like don't drink alcohol at all, and then the result of drinking alcohol is that you will be stuck here longer and not reach nirvana, like it's guaranteed?
No, there are so many people who kind of take the lay rules as kind of guidance, but it's really not. If you have a look at what the Buddha actually said on the subject,
Mhm.
He actually said, it was actually said that there are 2 minimum requirements to calling yourself a Buddhist. If you want to call yourself a Buddhist, there are 2 minimum requirements. One is that you're expected to follow the 5 kind of I can't remember the exact name for them, but the 5 rules that are laid out for lay people. Because the monks and the nuns, as we said, have like hundreds.
Tons of them, yeah.
And what the Buddha said was that I don't expect people who are lay people to follow hundreds of rules. That's unreasonable. But anybody who expects to progress on this path should follow 5 rules that should be followed no matter what. And in the kind of this day and age, and even amongst some Buddhists, they said, well, they're not meant to be hard and fast
more
rules.
like guidelines.
Yeah, but I think if you look at the scriptures, that's kind of not the case, because he says you should have to follow these 5 rules, and you go for refuge in what's called the triple gem. They're the 2 minimum requirements. The triple gem is the Buddha, the Dharma, which is the teachings of the Buddha, essentially, and the Sangha, which is the community.
So you're right. There's so many different lists, and there's so many different facets and pieces. So we talked about the 4 noble truths and the 8-fold path, and now we got these 5 rules. Now we have like the 3 gems. And what really gets me is how complicated it is on the outside. And I'm sure once you've studied it, or especially if you were raised in it, it would be really, really like a lot more straightforward and
second nature.
A lot less complicated. And I'm sure we have that even within our own culture that we sort of take for granted. But that is where for me it starts to really lose me, is that where you talk about you don't really have to, but you have to. Well, it's a have to, but it's not really a have to. And so for me, it's like, what is the physical application of that? Like, what are you actually telling me? So with a Christian, it's, God says it's a sin to do X. So if you do X, you're sinning against God. But if you love Jesus, he'll forgive you of that sin. So it's all good, right? If you don't love Jesus, you're going to hell. But with Buddhism, it's more complicated than that. So
it's the difference between Christianity and Buddhism is that you do not have to be a Buddhist. At no point in the Buddhist scriptures does the Buddha says this is for everybody.
Right. It's a personal pursuit. Yeah.
He thinks everybody is on the same thing. He thinks everybody's going to be reborn. He thinks everybody's going to continue to suffer. He thinks everybody is capable of reaching nirvana eventually.
Right.
But you don't have to actively go out. He didn't go out into his societies and say, right, you there, you must now become a Buddhist. What he's saying is, if you take this thing seriously and you really want to end suffering and you want to step into this path, then you must do this.
That makes a lot more sense to me. That actually makes it a lot more appealing too, don't you think? When it's like, it's almost like picking a diet plan. I hate to keep comparing Buddhism to like diet and exercise, but because we're talking about wellness, like that's essentially what we're talking about is wellness, right? And personal growth and enlightenment, right? So if you want to improve in this area, here is one avenue to improve in this area. And that is a lot more appealing this day and age in the West, or at least it's increasingly more appealing than it used to be. Then you have to, or else you'll be smited down or smitten down or whatever the term is. Or
what is said in Buddhism is that you're said to be incredibly lucky to be born as a human being, because as a human being, you've not got the great powers that you have if you're born in one of the heavenly realms. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to be like intoxicated by that power. You're not kind of dumb if you're born in the animal realm, because obviously humans and animals aren't the same thing.
Oh dear.
But you've been born just right. You're incredibly lucky.
You're like the mummy bear, right? Not too hot, not too cold.
So it's an opportunity, and there's a difference in Theravada Buddhism, in the older forms of Buddhism. There's a word in Buddhism which is Bodhisattva. And you'll hear it a lot in kind of Tibetan Buddhism, or sometimes in the Chinese form of Zen Buddhism. And it's in the Mahayana forms of Buddhism, which include Tibetan and Zen. It's kind of seen as a great being who is born and has put off enlightenment so that they can go out and help others in the world become enlightened. Gotcha. That's what the Dalai Lama is supposed to be, a reincarnation of one of these Bodhisattva beings. Traditionally, in the older forms of Buddhism, Bodhisattva referred specifically to the Buddha before he was born into this kind of enlightenment until he became enlightenment. So when in the older text, when you see the word Bodhisattva means, it doesn't mean one of these general beings. It means the Buddha specifically before he was enlightened. And it's said in Buddhism that, and this is why you're incredibly lucky to be born as a human, that anybody can accidentally stumble upon enlightenment at any time. It's you can,
it's whether or not you want to have faith in that. Like, do you want to? It's like a lottery ticket.
Yeah. Right? It's not like Christianity, where if you're in some forms of Christianity, if you're getting saved by faith, you've got to believe in Jesus,
right?
Because
there's conditions.
If you meet the right criteria, even if you're not looking for it, you will become enlightened. And
so that answers one of my questions, and that was that, like, so there's the question in Christianity, like, well, how are people saved before Jesus? And I've heard multiple different explanations of that, and none that are very like intriguing. But your explanation right there actually pre-answered that question for Buddhism, which is like, how were people enlightened, or how did they reach nirvana prior to the Buddha? And that is either they themselves were born like similar to the Buddha, like enlightened, or they stumbled across it sort of like accidentally.
There's a difference in Buddhism
like
between
the easy 5-step plan to
there's a difference in Buddhism between an enlightened being and a Buddha. An enlightened being is somebody who's just kind of stumbled. An enlightened being is somebody, a Buddha is somebody who's kind of stumbled upon the path to enlightenment himself. The Buddha described it as finding an old path in a forest that had been covered up by leaves, and he'd rediscovered that path and he'd cleared the way, and he kind of had to do the hard work of clearing the path, and then he found the goal. Whereas someone you can become enlightened by following a Buddha's teaching.
By following the path that's already been cleared.
Yeah, by following the path that's already been cleared. And
sometimes you're just wandering through the forest and just happen upon your goal.
Yeah.
I love it. I vote that one. I'm choosing that path.
There are said to have been, and again, this is a number that varies throughout kind of different texts or schools of Buddhism, but there are said to have been somewhere in the region of like 26 Buddhas in the past. People who throughout history who have, and this is going back eons, because in Buddhism there is no beginning. Time is beginningless. So there were said to have been 26 Buddhas born who kind of discovered nirvana themselves. And then there were like countless multitudes of other beings who became enlightened through listening to those Buddhas.
Because the whole thing about, like, you know, like in Islam, for example, the sort of start of the religion and the way it all kicked off was because Muhammad received that inspiration from God and the messages that was to then pass on to everyone as a prophet. But like with Buddhism, it's kind of just like the idea is that Buddha just got himself into a state where he just understood what was going on. Is that?
But didn't he kind of sort of purposefully seek it out though? Like, and I don't know the story as well as you do, Gilliver, so I'm going to say it wrong first, and then you can correct me. But he was like a prince, and he was disillusioned, right? And so he went looking for truth, right? And he lived for a while as like a
so
yes,
you are completely correct. That is the story. That story is
that's a pop culture kind of story. Yeah,
that's
is that what you're saying?
I mean, and it's widespread.
That's the Keanu Reeves version of the story.
Yeah, that's taught in Buddhism. That is taught in Buddhism. That historically, it wouldn't have happened like that. It was the prince of in the stories, it was a prince of king, and it was born of a miraculous birth, and he took 7 steps, and lotus leaves grew where he stood when he was a baby, and he stood up and he said, "I'm going to be enlightened for the sake of all beings," and all that mythological bullshit. And his birth was prophesized. He was either going to be a great king or a great religious leader. So his father kept him secreted away in his kingdom until he went out into the world.
So that is very much like the other sort of mythological stories.
Yeah.
Because that's not the story that I had heard, just like in sort of like not in passing, but like sort of absorbed through the years. I had heard it more grounded and like, no, he was a prince. He went out seeking like truth, and then he lived for a while as a what do you call it? Like a stoic sort of, like the person who denies himself stuff, like aesthetic.
No, that is the story, but
but without all the wooey stuff, like without all the plants growing and the prophecy. Like I had heard the very like
bare bones
simplistic version with like to me it sounded like more of a historical figure who became a religious figurehead and less of a mythological figure. But it sounds to me like the Buddhist story makes him out to be more mythological, just like the Jesus story, where we're like, well, is there a historical Jesus? I guess the same would be true of the of Siddhartha, right? Like, is there a historical Siddhartha? Well, not based on the story told in Buddhism.
There is a historical Siddhartha. There is a historical man, and it wasn't a god. That's a lot of things. I mean, we didn't even go down the long route of like kind of what people misunderstand about Buddhism, apart from when we talked about Buddha right at the start. But we there was a historical guy. It may or may not have been the son of a clan leader, but it wasn't a prince in a kind of regal palace. It'll have been a little mud hut somewhere in, and and one of it's interesting that from a scholarly perspective, one of the ways that certainly some scholars put forward that we know about the authenticity of the early Buddhist texts that are actually attributed to the Buddha is that in those texts, because we have Greek writings from that area of India at the time as well, which we can cross-reference with. And in the Buddhist texts, these big these towns that are starting to become metropolises in the Greek texts are mentioned in the Buddhist text, but they're only mentioned as really small places. So the kind of scholarly view on it from some quarters is that this all kind of authenticates the age of them, because they didn't know about these big sprawling towns that they had become by the time the Greeks were writing about them. And this is like the 3rd century BC, so it's quite close to the.
So it authenticates that it was written during a period. It doesn't necessarily authenticate, in my opinion, that he was a historical figure, because like Johnny Tremaine is placed in the historical period of like the American Revolution, right? And it's the story of a boy during the American Revolution. Well, certainly the events took place, and certainly there's a historical context for him, but Johnny Tremaine as a little boy never actually existed. So that's where with like Jesus and Buddha and all that, where I'm like, there might be a historical likelihood that a religious leader existed, but it's not even worth like trying to come to a conclusion in my opinion.
I think the Jesus and Buddha stories are very not similar in the stories themselves, but they're similar in their investigation, because they're both kind of heavily reliant on the scriptures themselves. To tell us, and there's, as we talked about in the Christianity episode, there's no reason to really doubt that Jesus existed as some kind of person. There's no reason to doubt that the Buddha existed as some kind of a
religious teacher.
And we certainly have contemporary religions to, like I said, Jainism, which was it was roughly around at the same time. Some scholars think that Buddha was actually familiar with the Jain practice.
Oh, nice.
So it's
and you think about it in that context, like it's not surprising that this sort of thing came around from that sort of place in that sort of time with that.
Sure, not at all.
No.
Yeah.
It
Same with
like
Jesus too. Yeah.
It was a
Absolutely.
revolution in thought at the time in that area, and there were loads of these little sects that were springing up.
Well,
So-
that brings up, because we're right at the end and we got to get going soon, but that brings
Yeah.
up one really quick point that I wanted to make, and then I'll let you guys make your final points as well. But that you said one little revelation, or like sort of a I think the word you used was better. But so we have these little like bursts of social. Oh, I wish my brain worked right now. I need more cold medicine. But there's these little bursts of God, enlightenment is not the right word either.
I know what you mean. These kind of cultural bursts
Yeah,
of understanding, which got these thought and
or not even
enlightenment.
understanding, but more like cultural revolution, where we, because the understanding might be like
it was a very
completely
similar
vast
time to what
outwards,
happened
but
in Greek with Socrates and
Yeah.
those guys and it was very 2500, 2600 BC. It was around the same time that these kind of bursts were happening of idea and thought and
yeah,
philosophy.
so let's call them idea bursts. I like that, because then I don't have to think about what to call it. But so you have these sort of like idea bursts, and they spawn all these different philosophies and religions and ideas, and then there's scriptures about them and people writing about them, and they're still present, at least in some form, thousands of years later. And my whole thing that makes it like a lot less intriguing, or a lot less miraculous, if you want to say it that way, is thinking about the amount of idea bursts that happened out there that just popped and didn't go anywhere, right? Like how many ideas were presented, how many movements were started, how many people had followers, and it
And
never
what
went
sort
anywhere.
of just happenstance circumstances were there that just happened to keep this one going rather than another one?
Yeah, and that's very similar to early Christianity as well, because there were so many different kind of schools of early Christian thought and early ideas which fell by the wayside. You only have to look at the amount of texts that didn't end up in the New Testament,
as well as all the other messiahs that were having a crack at it at the time. And
Brian, being one of the most famous ones.
So that brings us right up to the end of the show. Did you guys have any final thoughts on Buddhism in general, like that you wanted to share before we leave?
Part of one of my conclusions from this whole conversation, obviously coming at it from very much a novice position, and obviously describing it as being this thing that felt very foreign and different and stuff, is that, like, I don't know, I just want to find out more about it because I think it's really interesting and fascinating, and I think because I understood it from a sort of pop culture sort of level, I didn't appreciate necessarily the depth that it had. And actually, that's where all the interesting stuff kind of is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the case with lots of things in these sorts of area of discussion. But yeah, thanks, Jill, for sharing all the information you had. And I found it fascinating, this conversation. I've not talked very much, especially in this last half. But
I don't think either of us did. It was like the Gilliver show, but I loved it. I think it was good information.
We kind of expected
so we'll
it was going to be that.
Yeah. And so in honor of it being the Gilliver show, we'll let you finish it up.
The study of Buddhism is very misunderstood in the West, I think. I think it's something that would do to be better understood, just even on the basic level, because there are so many misunderstandings that come about in Buddhism, which we haven't even touched upon. Like, we briefly mentioned that Buddha wasn't a god. So many people believe that Buddha is a god. And Buddha, the fat guy, being confused for Buddha, and good and evil and karma and nirvana, and
there's so much there.
There's so much there. There's 2,500 years of really interesting history. The different schools, how they all developed and stuff. So yeah, it's really, I could talk about it for months.
Nice.
I love my scriptural study anyway, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Buddhism, but my area of expertise is in Buddhism without a shadow of a doubt.
And it's intriguing. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Agreed.
And we have less than a minute left. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the Facebook page, or to help keep the conversation going, add any questions or comments or little tidbits of knowledge that you have. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, I am Laura.
Richard.
And Richard. And this has been Skeptic Hangout. Until next time.
Keep questioning.
Interrogate your beliefs.
and stay skeptical.
Bye
Ta-ra.
all.